Welcome, everyone, to a different kind of doula. My name is Colleen, and I'm here today with Maureen, and Kathleen will be back and join us next week. So today's topic is on death and culture, and it's a very large topic. So the question is, how does death affect culture, and how do people in different cultures interpret it? Death is, as we know, is something inevitable and common to all human beings. However, uh, cultures vary in how they define and manage living and the inevitability of death and what happens when a person dies. So every culture has their rituals to mark the deaths of its members and to assist survivors. And these outward expressions of mourning, they can be very solemn, they can be very joyous. It depends on the group's beliefs about death. I attended recently a Hispanic and Panamanian funeral, and it was my nephew's sister-in-law, his wife's sister, who's 41 years old. And I basically had the honor of acting as an end-of-life doula and actually meeting her when she was alert, and then took the family through and was just present with whatever they needed. This is a very large extended family. The young woman who died, who was 41, had two children she left behind, one 21 and one 14, who just turned 14. Um, was gave a one of the most She was a very unique person. When she greeted people, she always had her arms out there, just ready to hug. Well, here's a woman on her deathbed. I'm walking in, meeting her for the first time. I had met parts of the family. I had known several of the sisters prior. She had six sisters and two brothers. And when I walked in, she threw open her arms. She's on her deathbed, threw open her arms and said, and smiled and said, I am so happy to finally meet you. As a doula, I just sat down. I had no agenda with her. And so she just immediately started her life review. So this was a very, very unique experience, but it's as I said, was a large extended family and included friends, and the community was there for her 24/7, especially the family. The father I had to do some work with. He was from Mexico. The father, yes, and the husband was from Mexico, and he was shattered, and of course his feelings he kept close. But we actually had some really great interactions. And at the I was at the viewing, I was at the funeral, and I was at the graveside. I sat with the family. I was invited to sit with the family. And so it was a big honor to see things up close. And there was a lot of hugging, there was a lot of crying. Um, it was just an amazing experience of a wonderful community experience. And there was a reception afterwards. So the gravesite is places a great deal of pride with Hispanic population. It's often decorated with candles and flowers and arrangements. And there were a lot of candles around. People were carrying them. For the 9 days after a funeral, the family members will light the candles in their local church to offer prayers for the soul of the dead person and recite a rosary. But here's the interesting thing here, too. We had different religions. Okay, so as a group, some from Mexico in this family, some from the poor family was from Panama. And what you saw were Catholics, people that have left all religion but believe in God. So you could call them spirit, you could call them whatever. Mormon, um, Santorini, which is a sect of the Catholicism, Afro-Cuban to be exact in practice. It was amazing. And it was in Spanish and English. So they were Americanized to a point, but they were never going to let go of their culture, which I appreciated. Sometimes people will apologize to me for not knowing English really well, but I always say I apologize to them for not knowing Spanish. So, so she was laid to rest, and after the burial, it's common to have a reception, which they had. And what one of the sisters told me was, Colleen, if we had put it in social media, there would have been over 1,000 people here because that's what they do. So there were a little over 100 present at this. So they comfort one another with their loss. And, you know, death with the Latino culture is an extension of life. And so the belief is usually you know, there are rituals that do honor the dead, as I mentioned, and they're practiced in many Latino cultures, but there's different factions of the culture and they do things differently. Maureen, I'm wondering what some of your thoughts are.
I love that you're talking about the Hispanic and Latino cultures because growing up in California, I witness every time I go to the cemetery to my dad's grave, there are rich funeral, not funeral, just celebrations. They come out for everything. They picnic at the gravesite. They, um, excuse me, as you said, decorate the gravesite. They're always the most elaborately decorated with flowers and different ornaments, and it's just so beautiful. But what I really love is the community coming together around the grave. And I remember saying to my mother, "Isn't that beautiful? I think it's just so beautiful that they are here celebrating those that they love." My mom's like, "Oh, no, I could never do that." You know, she goes to the cemetery regularly to pay her respects, but is very prim and proper, very, Anglo-American, the way she views it. But so I love that. But one of the things that I've learned about the Hispanic and uh, excuse me, Latino cultures, they they celebrate death so well. Excuse me. But but they hold on to life. They're not ones that are quick to stop life support. They're not ones that are quick to do nothing at as someone is approaching death. They want to try to hold on to that life. I'm going to let you take over for a minute, Colleen, please.
I totally agree with you about that, and different cultures do different, very, very different things. So, the one culture that's kind of really different from some of these Latin cultures and even African cultures, everything is the Swedish, which basically they're kind of a secular country, and they have their own set unique funeral traditions, but they're very private. They put the deceased out and away for about 1 to 3 weeks, and then they just keep everything very tight and very, very quiet. And that's so different from the other cultures that I've been looking at. They're very more community, not American as much, you know.
So, as Americans, we tend to be a more individual and independent culture. And so, what we have to remember is that all of these cultures within our nation of, the United States, is that it depends on which generation we're talking about, because so often they have become westernized and have adopted so many of the Western and American cultural traditions, but they still honor their familial traditions. I have a friend who's 2 years ago, her mother, and just a few months ago, her father, they're Korean. And even though she's very westernized, she did grow up in Korea and different parts of Asia. Her father was a diplomat. But watching the hierarchy and how she honored her father at the end of his life was very succinct with the Korean culture, and that death, following that, her father was the head of the family. Um, they did not cremate him. They're a Catholic family, but even though cremation is allowed both in Korea and in the Catholic faith nowadays, They still chose not to cremate him, but she was telling me about some of the different cultural beliefs that they do. And one of them I heard about, and then I just read it when we were preparing for this show. And she had said, oftentimes people in Korea that are cremated the family will use some of the ashes to create colorful beads. And that is something that, many people here in America do too. You can have the family's ashes created into beautiful glass ornaments or glass sculptures, so many different things. But I thought it was interesting reading on the Korean culture and then seeing what she had just gone through, despite how westernized she has become.
That is fascinating. The burial beads with South Korea are big, and I noticed at this particular funeral I was at, actually the family members made beads. They had the children involved with it, and each of them wore one. And when Julie was alive, they gave her beads, and they all had the same beads on, all the family members. So all during funeral services, I would see different people. I would meet them. I would talk to them, and they had these beads on that were family members, and it was beautiful. So I think that's a interesting how things spill from culture to culture after a while too. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it is.
one of the things I did notice, and Maureen, this is something with me that I, I I always check if I'm going to a different culture, I check what color should I wear. Now, being an American, it's usually black, although it has changed over the years. Young people don't necessarily do that. But with this Hispanic population, it is black. And I did see a few in grays and darker colors. The men generally will wear darker colors. And also, I saw a few people wearing white. Well, one of the sisters wears white because I thought she was just being, different. She was different. She did things very differently than her family, but she was still, had the held on to the culture, but she was in white. And then I realized she's Santorini. So they wear white. And that's what she does all year round. That's her color. And so, but the Muslims, for instance, or in China or the Sikhs, uh, they would wear white as well. I think it's China, the Hindus, the Sikhs, and some of the Muslim services, not all. And in Ghana and South Africa, it's red. They love bright colors, and and it's very important for their funeral services. So my advice is, and in I think it's Thailand, it's purple. And the Philippines also, I think, sometimes wear red. It's just something you want to check before you go to any funeral, especially if there's mixed, and you want to ask people that would know, what color should I wear, and to be respectful.
Yeah, I think that's always the most important, is to really ask. And as we're talking about all different cultures, we Colleen and I both know this, but to realize that this is a generalization. And so even though some people in the culture might do it, they're all individuals too that might have taken on their own practices from maybe family culture that they had. Just like not every American celebrates Fourth of July the same. Not every person from a different culture celebrates. So I really want to stress these are generalizations. And that's why like Colleen, I just want to emphasize how she said, ask, what is the color? Do you have a certain color? And the other things that are, how would you like me to show up? Not just in color, but what are your traditions around mourning or when you are at a funeral celebration? Do the women and men get separated? I think that in many of the Muslim ceremonies, the women and men are separated. So the more we can ask, And the more we can become familiar, that people like to know that we're curious about their cultures, that we are um, honoring them by asking these questions.
You know, I was just thinking of some things of how, as an American, we may view a culture as odd because of how they proceed with things. And I'm thinking about, I'll call it caskets or coffins in other cultures. And I was thinking about China and the Philippines have a really interesting thing about hanging coffins. So they're hung in the mountainside and in very difficult places to reach. And people in the Philippines do this. I said China and the Philippines, right? Yeah. They do this as they do that. And so I thought that was interesting. But also the Philippines, they have this special funeral where they actually dress the person up and sit them in a chair and put a cigarette in their mouth like they're still living and do this and have this for they'll sit there for like several weeks. Now, if you're trying to explain this to a young person, they would just laugh hysterically at this. But at this point, you have to say, okay, so what is it that how did that come about? You know, and it's really their belief about the living transitioning into, death and beyond. And so I think these things are fascinating, how different cultures view burials, whether it's a funeral pyre or, you know, now in America, we're getting to be very eco-friendly, green funerals with willow baskets, woven baskets, all kinds of different things.
It is fascinating to me. You know what? I think it's fascinating too is how different cultures grieve because
Oh,
so
yeah.
many cultures, it's really communal grieving that they do. It's not just like in America, we tend to be, like I said, we're more independent and we might grieve, maybe grieve with our family, but we don't always show outward grief. We don't wear the black armbands or things like they did in the past, a couple decades or centuries ago. So we really don't know who's grieving, and so many cultures, it's the beauty in their culture that allows us to know that they're grieving. I think that they throw elaborate celebrations. I think the Hindus is it 13 days that they celebrate before they they bury the ashes, not bury the ashes, scatter them on a sacred river. But that's part of all the communal grief. I mean, most Hindus and even many in America, their dream is to have their ashes scattered on the Ganges River, I think it's called, the
Hmm.
Ganges.
Hmm.
And I first read that in Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal. That's what they did with his father because that's what his father wanted. But that the Lakota tribe in the Native American culture, they have a word, and I can't remember what it is, but it means we are all related. So it's not just the family of the person in their tribe, but it's the entire tribe. And that's true of many of our Native American tribes. It is very much the tribe is the family. And that's different because there's over 500 Native American tribes in America alone. So, each one is very individualistic and stuff, but it's this communal coming together for death and celebrating life and mourning together. I'm trying to think. The Buddhists, I think they have 49 days
I think it's
of
49 days. Yeah.
mourning following a funeral, where they have time together, the family, the community, but they also make little figurines out of clay and they make prayer flags, and it's a collective way for them to express their grief. So there's many beautiful ways for that different cultures come together to express grief.
The thing that always strikes me is that in our culture, the American culture, we tend to hold our mourning inside and we just kind of will grieve and we will cry. But I even noticed in this funeral, I really wanted to cry. Oh, I did. Everything was just hitting me from all different directions. And I, I was worried because I didn't bring tissue. Now, isn't that interesting? And so have this glove and I'm kind of tapping my tears and I should have asked for some because there were tissues around from other people. But what I really admire about some cultures is the word keening, where they just let it out and it's screaming and it's just mourning and it comes from a very deep place. And I'll never forget, I was living in California and I was in this condo and one night I heard a man, what I now would call keening, and he had lost his partner. And I thought to myself, at first I was scared, and then I realized what had happened. And then I said to myself, well, that's really what you do. That's really how people feel, but they hold it in. And other cultures are so relieved by letting it out and just screaming, you know. And what are we? We're somebody will think, oh, get her on an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety drugs. Let's sedate them. Oh, yes, let's sedate them. And I have seen people at funerals totally sedated and numb. And I'd almost rather see them cry and feel like they could cry. So yeah, grieving, Maureen, I think is important with that.
I do love how so many different cultures do, like you said, keening, and I saw that occasionally in the hospital when we would take care of people from different cultures that were dying, and we think that it's oh, you have to be quiet. I remember, and I can't remember right off the top of my head right now which culture it was, but they asked if they could have a room where they could go because they wail. Wailing is part of
Yeah,
their
wailing is
grieving process and the keening and so my friend that was the nurse took care of that. She got them to be able to take the body to their loved one to an unoccupied room so that they could have that proper time of mourning right after the body. And I think it's so important that we honor and respect every person, every culture's way of mourning. Just because it's not ours doesn't mean it's right or wrong. Just if we hold our grief in, that's not right or wrong. That's just for us. So, yeah, there's so many powerful things. Colleen, we were talking about different burial options too. I mean, we already talked about the Hindus that want to scatter their ashes on the sacred rivers. Not every Hindu can because they're spread worldwide now, and, so but to honor them and help them do that as best we can if we are a doula working with them, or what would be considered a sacred burial option here in America or here in the area in which we live. So the more we can question and ask them those things, Jewish people, and we have a guest here today that could probably answer this, but they do not like to leave the body from the time of death until burial. They want someone there, and usually that's why burials are ideally within 24 hours. It used to be the Catholic Church was within 3 days, although that's all changed now. But that's very important, and to honor that because oftentimes the morgue comes to pick up someone's body and you have to be the if you can or train the families how to say no, you have to tell them this is important, someone needs to accompany the body to the morgue, and this is our practice and this is why we do this. And ideally it would be done prior to ever having their loved one die. But these things are all important to think about and to take into consideration. There's so many different ways people tend to their decedent soon after it's happened. Do you know of any different ones, Colleen?
well, no, I'm just thinking as you're talking about it, my favorite is of all time is the funeral processions in New Orleans and how they'll play, it's the Cajun, the yeah, Louisiana and Cajun culture practice the traditional European and African approach. And it's a jazz procession in which the dirge is played prior as they go along. And then at the reception, they pick up the music and the mood. And I just think that in some ways, there's a combination of sorrow and joy. And isn't that really that's the part I look at. Where is the joy in death? But there is joy in death. There is a celebration. There is some joy, you know. And some people I think have it, some cultures I think have it better. But that was the closest I've seen in America where they actually do something with it.
Yeah, I think uh what have we read that it's in the cultures that celebrate the dead is when they practice or where they believe they worship and their ancestors.
Yeah,
And I think Japanese do this. And life is seen as cyclical rather than linear.
right.
And that it's just a cycle. And so that celebration is so important to them. Plus, what I read about the Japanese is that they think that their ancestors have the ability to either come back and bless or to curse them. So I think I'd want to have a big celebration if I could. If I was thinking, geez, they could come back and curse me, maybe I'll have a good celebration.
One of the best books I've read, and there's several, by the way, but Caitlin Doughty wrote the book From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find a Good Death. And I just think that is an amazing book. And she just highlights a few cultures, really, from Mexico and to the Zoroastrian sky burials, etc. But I think her point basically is that people respond best when they help care for the deceased and have a space to participate in the process. That's really what she was getting at. And that again goes back to community and participation. And that's what we do as doulas.
Well, I hope we've touched on a lot of many topics
Yes.
here, and we could go in depth on each one. So, if you are caring for people of different cultures, just because they might be, let's say, Chinese, ask them: are you from a certain um, subculture within the Chinese culture, or look at all of our rich um, South Pacific islands or the islands of the Caribbean. They all have their own subcultures of the larger culture. So ask. The more questions we can ask, the more information we can gather from them, the better we can care and support for those that we are working with, and the more we can support their families, which is so important. Well, and now it's time to talk about our different kind of doula is every Thursday at 4 p.m. We're so glad you're here with us or listening to us later on. And we're from a Gentle Passage Doula Collective. And we have many different offerings. We offer a death cafe the second Friday of every month. That's just for a place to come and there's no agenda. It's just whatever the topic is meant to be that day. And it's very holistic and free form, just some place to come, a safe, comfortable place to come and talk about death and end of life issues. We also offer monthly training webinars to doulas and other caregivers just on topics that can enhance your practice. And we train doulas. We offer a virtual 8-week training that our next one starts this coming May. And we do in person once or twice a year. The next one is in fall of 2024. So we really appreciate you coming and joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. So thanks so much from Colleen, Kathleen, who's on vacation, and myself, a different kind of doula. Bye-bye.
Bye.